I don't remember the exact moment it started, the slipping, the drifting, the quiet unraveling of the life I thought I was holding together. All I know is that one night, long after the rest of the world went to sleep, I found myself standing alone in my living room, staring at the faint reflection of my own face on the dark window. My apartment was silent, but inside my chest something was collapsing, not loudly, not dramatically, just giving way, like a rope that had been frayed for years and finally snapped without warning. I remember touching the glass, watching the city lights blur into strange shapes, and realizing I hadn't really felt present in days, maybe weeks, maybe longer. It's frightening how quietly a life can stop moving while you keep pretending to walk. I'd go through the motions, unlock the door, warm the food, answer the emails, but nothing felt connected to me. I would catch myself staring at the same corner of the room, unable to explain how long I'd been standing there. I'd sit down to tie my shoes and end up staring at my hands, feeling like they belonged to someone else. Time didn't flow anymore. It pooled, gathering in heavy stillness around my feet, trapping me in a reality that felt nothing like my own. There was a night when I woke up at 3:17 am, exactly 3:17, and it felt like the universe had paused around me. The silence was so complete it felt unnatural, as if even the air was holding its breath. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart beating too loudly, and I realized something that hit me harder than any heartbreak I'd ever known. I couldn't remember the last time I felt joy that wasn't forced. I couldn't remember the last time I laughed without hearing the echo of something empty behind it. I couldn't even remember what version of myself I was supposed to be living as. The confident one, the hopeful one, the strong one. They all felt like characters and stories I'd told other people, but none of them felt like me. The truth I didn't want to admit was that somewhere along the way, I had stepped out of my own life without noticing. I was watching myself exist from a distance, like observing a stranger whose habits I recognized but whose soul I didn't. I kept waiting for the spark to return, for the passion to wake up, for the world to feel real again. But the days kept passing, and all I felt was a kind of numbness that scared me more than pain ever could. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If that's true, then mine had been soaked in a shade I didn't recognize, something heavy, something dim, something that made every morning feel like lifting a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. And even though no one around me noticed, I knew I was slipping deeper into a place I didn't know how to climb out of. But here's the strange part, the part most people never expect. The moment I realized how lost I was, a spark flickered, small, fragile, almost insignificant, but real. Because if you're aware enough to feel yourself drifting, then a part of you is still alive enough to care. A part of you is watching, waiting, and refusing to let you disappear completely. That tiny spark, no matter how faint, is proof that you haven't given up. Not truly, not yet. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe it's because that same spark inside you is fighting to stay lit. Maybe you clicked this video because some quiet part of you is still searching for meaning, for direction, for a reason to keep moving when everything in you feels like stopping. Maybe you're here because you know, deep down, that something needs to change before you fade into someone you no longer recognize. Stay with me. Don't look away from the screen. Don't tell yourself you'll watch this later. You need to hear this now. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now. Because what you're going through is not the end. It's the beginning of something you haven't seen yet. And if this opening hit something inside you, if it made you feel seen in a way the world rarely makes you feel, then subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel grow, and it tells me to keep creating videos for people who need a voice in the dark to remind them they're not alone. After that night at 3:17 am, something in me shifted, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a quiet and settling way that felt like the ground beneath my life had softened. I woke the next morning with the same heaviness, the same fog behind my eyes, but there was a strange awareness threading through it. Like noticing the outline of a doorway in a dark room you've been stumbling around in for months. I didn't step through it. I didn't even walk toward it. But I knew it was there, and knowing was enough to make everything feel slightly more fragile, as if the life I'd been holding together with excuses and habit was beginning to fracture one thin linea at a time. It's strange how breaking never feels like breaking at first. It feels like misplacing your own thoughts. Like forgetting why you walked into a room. Like losing interest in things that once lit you up. Like staring at a task that used to take 10 minutes and feeling your chest tighten because it now feels impossible. At first, you call it exhaustion, then stress, then burnout. You tell yourself it's temporary, that you just need rest, a weekend off, a change in routine. But deep down you know these are just names you're giving to something you can't bring yourself to acknowledge. The version of you you've been carrying is collapsing under its own weight. I remember sitting on my apartment floor one evening, back against the couch, staring at a notebook open on the coffee table. I had written nothing, not a single word. It wasn't that I didn't want to write, I did. I desperately wanted to say something, to express something, to reach into myself and pull out anything that felt true. But every thought died before it could form. Every sentence felt dishonest. Every feeling felt too tangled to touch. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just tired. I wasn't just overwhelmed. I was being dismantled from the inside. People talk about growth as if it's always intentional. As if you make a decision, take a deep breath, and begin. But sometimes growth doesn't wait for your permission. Sometimes it happens through destruction, quiet, internal, visible destruction. The kind no one sees because you've become too good at hiding it. The kind that strips away pieces of who you thought you were until all that remains is a raw, unfamiliar version of you that scares you because you don't know what to do with it. I didn't realize it then, but the unraveling was necessary. There were beliefs inside me that needed to crumble, the belief that strength meant never falling apart, that worthiness was something I had to earn, that failure meant I had chosen the wrong direction. There were expectations I had clung to for years, long past their expiration, and they were rotting inside me, poisoning my ability to see myself clearly. My life wasn't being ruined, it was being cleared, but in the middle of it, the clearing felt like devastation. It felt like sitting in silence so thick it pressed against my ribs. It felt like being unable to cry because I didn't even know which part of me was hurting. It felt like letting go of a person didn't realize I had been pretending to be. It felt like reaching for answers in a room with no light. And the strangest part was that no one could tell. On the outside, I looked functional, busy, tired, maybe a bit withdrawn, but fine. People don't see the quiet kind of breaking. They only notice the dramatic collapse, the outburst, the moment everything explodes. They don't see the months before, when the cracks first appear, tiny and silent, beneath a life that still looks whole. But cracks are not failures. Cracks are openings. The ancient builders of Roman aqueducts used to carve small faults into the stone on purpose so that water pressure could escape. A structure without intentional weaknesses would burst under stress. I didn't know it then, but the fractures inside me weren't signs that I was falling apart. They were signs that something inside me needed room to expand. Something was growing, even as I felt myself shrinking. That realization didn't heal me. It didn't solve anything, but it kept me from disappearing. It kept me curious, even in the numbness. And curiosity is often the first sign of life returning. I didn't know yet what I was becoming. I didn't know what needed to be rebuilt. I only knew one thing. The breaking wasn't random. It was making space. It was revealing truths I had spent years burying. It was stripping away illusions that had kept me comfortable but small. And even though pain felt senseless at the time, it was preparing me for the moment when I would finally see that none of this was an ending. It was the necessary beginning. I didn't understand what the breaking in me was trying to reveal until the world outside me began to shift as well. It happened subtly at first. People I thought would always be around grew quieter, their messages shorter, their presence thinner. Some stopped checking in altogether. Others offered the kind of half-hearted concern that feels more like obligation than care. A few simply vanished without explanation, as if my struggle made me invisible, or worse, inconvenient. For a while, I told myself they were busy, distracted, overwhelmed with their own lives. But late at night, when I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the relentless pulsing of my own thoughts, I realized something far more painful. They hadn't drifted away by accident. They had backed away from the version of me that was no longer easy to love. It took me longer than I want to admit to stop blaming myself. I replayed conversations, moments, memories, looking for the flaw in me that must have pushed them away. But the more I searched, the more I saw something I had missed all along. The people who left weren't rejecting me, they were revealing themselves. Some relationships aren't broken by hardship, they are exposed by it. They only survive as long as you're strong, entertaining, convenient. The moment you falter, the moment you need more than you can give, the truth steps out from behind the mask. There was a night when I sat in the back seat of a parked car, windows fogged, rain tapping softly on the roof, and I realized I was mourning people who had never truly seen me. I had edited myself for years to fit what they needed, a version of me that smiled through exhaustion, laughed away disappointment, swallowed pain until it soured in my stomach. I thought this stronger me was the one they valued. But strength wasn't what held those relationships together. Illusion was. And illusions don't survive when life grows heavy. What surprised me more than the people who left were the failures that stayed. Every mistake I made, every plan that crumbled, every door that closed at first, they felt like punishments. Proof that I was off track. Evidence that something in me was fundamentally wrong. I used to stare at the ceiling at AM, replaying every decision I wished I had made differently, imagining the alternate lives I could have lived if I had chosen better, moved faster, tried harder. But something changed the deeper I fell into the silence. I began to see that failure wasn't an interruption. It was direction. The wrong turns taught me more about who I was than the right ones ever could. They stripped away assumptions I had carried for years. They forced me to question what I had been chasing and why I had been chasing it. They humbled my ego, sharpened my instincts, and brought me face to face with the parts of myself I had avoided. And then there was the silence, the one that settled around me like fog. A silence so complete, it felt almost alive. At first, I mistook it for loneliness, for abandonment, for proof that the world had stopped caring. But the longer I sat in it, the more I realized it was trying to teach me something I had never learned: how to hear myself. With no voices around me, no noise to drown in, no expectations pulling at my skin, I began to recognize the faint whisper of my own truth. The truth I had buried beneath other people's opinions, beneath fear, beneath the pressure to be someone I wasn't. Silence wasn't punishment. It was clarity. I didn't know yet where that clarity was leading me, but I could feel it gathering inside me, quiet, persistent, undeniable. It was shaping me in ways I couldn't see, preparing me for a version of life I wasn't ready to imagine. And for the first time in a long time, the journey didn't feel meaningless. It felt deliberate. What the silence revealed next was something I never expected. The parts of me I had spent years hiding began to push to the surface. Not the strengths I proudly displayed, not the polished confidence I offered the world, but the tender, fragile places I had buried under performance and pride. At first, I tried to silence them, to shove them back into the shadows where I believed they belonged. But the more I resisted, the louder they grew, as if the collapse of my old life had weakened the walls I had built to contain them. It's unsettling to meet your own vulnerability after years of running from it. I had always believed strength meant endurance, composure, the ability to hold everything together without cracking. But sitting alone with myself, stripped of distractions and noise, I realized that what I called strength had been nothing more than a costume, something worn to convince others I was unshakable, even when I was breaking behind the fabric. And now that the costume had fallen away, I was forced to confront the truth I had avoided. The fragile parts of me weren't the problem. The shame I attached to them was. I remember one morning when the sunlight came through the window in a way that felt almost intrusive. It illuminated the dust on my desk, the unwashed cup beside my bed, the pile of clothes I hadn't bothered to fold. Everything looked exposed, including me. I sat there, still and quiet, feeling as if the light was demanding honesty. It struck me then that my weaknesses, the fear, the doubt, the loneliness, were not signs of failure. They were entry points, openings where new strength was trying to form. Nature has a strange way of teaching this truth. There are forests in the Pacific Northwest where certain seeds only open after a wildfire. Heat is their catalyst, destruction, their beginning. Standing there in the debris of who I thought I was, I realized I was the same. The fire I feared had cracked something inside me, but instead of ruin, it had revealed fertile ground beneath the ash. The person I had been, disciplined, dependable, composed, had been built for a world that no longer existed. Their beliefs were too narrow, their dreams too small, their identity too dependent on being admired rather than understood. Losing that version of myself felt like grief at first. I mourned them the way one mourns a childhood friend, with nostalgia, confusion, and a sting of betrayal. But the longer I sat with the truth, the more I understood that this old self hadn't been destroyed. They had been outgrown. It was like looking into a mirror that had been smudged for years. I had accepted that blurry reflection as the truth because it was familiar, not because it was accurate. Now, the silence, the distance, the breaking, each one was wiping the glass clean, roughly, uncomfortably, with friction that felt personal. But nothing real was being erased, only the distortions that kept me from seeing myself clearly. And then there was time. I used to believe I was behind, late, failing to meet some invisible deadline everyone else seemed to follow effortlessly. But the more I leaned into the stillness, the more I understood that my timing had never been wrong. I was unfolding at the pace required for the life I was meant to build. Not too fast, not too slow, exactly right for the transformation happening beneath the surface. Glaciers move slowly enough to appear motionless, yet they carve valleys, shape mountains, redirect rivers. Their strength isn't in speed, but in persistence. I began to realize that maybe my journey was the same. Maybe the pace that once filled me with shame was actually the rhythm required to reshape my life from the inside out. What I used to label weakness was becoming the source of my rebirth. What I once called failure was becoming my direction. And the identity I thought I had lost was beginning to look more like a doorway than a tomb. Something was emerging. I could feel it. Something quieter, truer, and far stronger than the person I had been pretending to be. What I didn't realize until much later was that even in the quietest, most uncertain chapter of my life, I was already building something. It just wasn't visible yet. You don't notice a tree growing roots. You don't notice muscles strengthening beneath the surface. You don't notice healing while you're still inside the wound. But one morning, as I sat by the window with a cup of coffee I actually finished for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift, an undeniable awareness that all the invisible moments I had dismissed as nothing were, in truth, preparing me for everything that would come next. The work happening inside me wasn't dramatic. It didn't look impressive. No one applauded it. No one saw it. But it was real, and it was mine. I began to understand that the smallest choices, the ones that seemed meaningless, were laying the foundation for the life I hadn't yet grown into. Getting out of bed even when my bones felt heavy. Washing a single dish instead of all of them. Answering one message instead of drowning in guilt for the rest. These tiny movements didn't feel like progress, but they were. They were signals to my mind and body that I hadn't surrendered, that I was still reachable, still capable, still willing to move even when movement felt unnatural. I used to believe that transformation had to be loud to matter, that the world needed to witness it for it to be real. But the truth is, the most important work we ever do happens when no one is watching. It happens in the quiet hours when doubt is louder than hope. It happens in the moments we choose to try again, not because we feel strong, but because some quiet part of us refuses to stay where we are. It happens in the darkness long before the world gets to see the light. There's an old story about Italian artisans who restore broken frescoes. They spend months working in silence, using brushes so small they can barely be seen with the naked eye. Their hands hover over ancient fragments, touching them delicately, carefully, patiently. From a distance, nothing seems to change, but up close, inch by inch, the original colors begin to return. The painting breathes again. That's what my invisible work felt like. Unseen, slow, subtle, but alive. I realized then that I wasn't rebuilding my old life. I was creating a new one that didn't rely on validation or applause or performance. One that wasn't measured by how put together I looked, but by how honest I could be with myself. The person I was becoming didn't need to impress anyone. They only needed to be real. And that required a different kind of hope, the kind that doesn't come from wishing the future will look a certain way, but from knowing I can face it no matter what it becomes. The kind of hope that isn't built on the illusion that life will be gentle, but on the understanding that I have survived enough to trust my own resilience. Viktor Frankl once wrote that the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. I didn't fully understand those words until I felt the quiet strength rising inside me, one breath at a time. This hope wasn't bright. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. It was steady, grounded, scarred. It didn't promise that everything would be perfect. It didn't tell me that my pain was over. It simply whispered, "You're not done yet." And strangely, that was enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to choose tomorrow. Enough to believe that meaning could be created, even from the ruins. The more I leaned into that hope, the more I realized that the life I was building in secret was far more real than the one I had lost in public. The public life had been curated, polished, presentable, but this new one built from silence, from pain, from slow rebirth carried a depth I had never touched before. It didn't need applause. It didn't need permission. It grew in the dark, and because of that, it was unshakable. And now, looking back at the person I was when everything fell apart, I don't feel shame. I feel gratitude. That version of me walked into the fire so I could walk out of it stronger. They endured the breaking so I could experience the becoming. They survived long enough for me to rewrite the story instead of ending it. If you're here listening to this, it means some part of you is still fighting, too. Still reaching for something more. Still believing, even faintly, that your story isn't over. And I'm telling you it isn't. You're building something right now, even if you can't see it. One day, when the light reaches the places you've been working so hard to heal, you'll understand why it took this long. Why it hurt this much. Why it mattered. Until then, don't rush. Don't compare your pace. Don't underestimate the power of your invisible work. Trust that something inside you is growing, strengthening, awakening. Trust that you are becoming someone you've never been before, someone capable of carrying the weight of a true life, not just a performed one. And if this spoke to you, if even one sentence found its way into a locked room inside your heart, then subscribe to the channel. It helps this space grow, so more people walking through their own dark chapters can find a voice reminding them to stay. Your story isn't finished. Your light isn't gone. You are still becoming.